Welcome back to the studio. You're watching France 24. This is Eye on Africa. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Let's take a look at our top stories in this edition. Calls for a recount of Gabon's ballots grow louder as EU observers report clear anomalies in the vote. Opposition leader Jean Ping continues to claim he is the real winner of the August 27th election and not Ali Bongo. Renting out their own children to human traffickers. Families in Benin send away thousands of young children a year in the hopes their remittances will bring them out of poverty. Our correspondents investigated the practice in their report. And missing global education targets by a long shot. According to a new report from UNESCO, it'll take until 2042 to get all children around the world to complete their primary education. One of the researchers for that report will be our guest in this edition. Not giving in. Opposition leader Jean Ping continues to claim he won Gabon's presidential election and not Ali Bongo. Ping also says the real death toll in post-election violence stands between 50 and 100 and not the government's official count of 3. Many families claim they still have no news of loved ones. Meanwhile, pressure is mounting to show transparency regarding the vote's results, with French Prime Minister Manuel Valls calling on the government in Libreville to recount the ballots. Nicolas Germain has the story.
In Bitam, in northern Gabon, Muslims were targeted during post-electoral violence. The town is an opposition stronghold. Because Ali Bongo is a Muslim, they were suspected of having supported him. Most people in Gabon are Christians. Muslims represent less than 10% of the population. In Bitam, many of their shops were razed to the ground.
They destroyed my stalls. They looted my shop. They said they were unhappy, but they've hurt us, the poor shopkeepers.
Most of the violence took place in the capital, Libreville. The parliament was burnt down, so on Tuesday lawmakers had to gather in the Senate building. In front of the courthouse, the families of those who've been arrested continued to wait for their release. Paris said a dozen Franco-Gabonese citizens have been detained.
We have no news. He's French. We heard President Hollande called for the release of French citizens, so we thought he'd be released, but they didn't. He's inside. He can't eat or drink.
My husband has disappeared. We have 2 children.
French Prime Minister Manuel Valls once again asked for a recount, which the EU and Washington have also called for.
There are some doubts and disagreements. The European observers on the ground, because these elections were monitored, levelled criticisms on the basis of objective facts. Wisdom would call for a new vote count.
On Tuesday, the EU observer mission used particularly strong language, saying there was a clear anomaly in the results of one region where Ali Bongo won more than 95% of the vote.
In Libya, forces loyal to the internationally backed government continue to clear the city of Sirte of Islamic State group forces. Bomb squads are now sweeping areas taken from the jihadists over the last few weeks and clearing landmines, explosive belts, and several missiles. The cleanup operation is necessary before civilians can return to their homes. Sirte first fell to the extremists from the Islamic State organization more than a year ago. Protecting Ivory Coast's forests at the expense of its farmers. The government is cracking down on illegal cocoa farmers, evicting them from the forests they had transformed into orchards. Between independence and 2010, 80% of Ivory Coast's virgin forests were lost, according to the European Union. In another study, scientists found the country has the highest deforestation rate in Africa, a rate that accelerated during the crises that gripped Ivory Coast from 2002 to 2011. Those forests are home to chimpanzees, forest elephants, and pygmy hippos. It's the world's fastest growing form of organized crime. Human trafficking takes place all over the world, but Benin has long been known for being a destination, a transition point, as well as a source of forced labor. Today, thousands of children are sent off by their parents, according to a local tradition called Vido Megon, that allows children to go to school or learn a trade in exchange for working. But they often end up forced to do hard labor by traffickers and their networks instead. Our team in Benin sent you this report.
After lengthy negotiations, the manager of the small restaurant has allowed a camera to film her. To convince her, an activist from an NGO has promised support for the children. She's had 7 girls from the north of the country brought to her native village of Zapota in the southeast. In exchange, the manager is expected to send at least €70 to their parents every year.
The amount of money their parents receive depends on the age of the child. It varies between 50 and 100,000 francs.
An interview conducted close to the restaurant led us to another example of child exploitation behind this temple on the outskirts of the village. 8 children are working the cassava and bean fields. The owner of the plot, a priest, assures us that the children are orphans and go to school, statements contradicted by the children themselves.
Do you go to school? Do you go to school?
No.
Another false statement challenged by the children: their parents are alive. The priest insists that without him, these children would have been handed over to a trafficker with links to Nigeria. Put ill at ease by our questions, he seeks to reassure us.
Half of what is cultivated here serves to finance their needs in clothing and food.
In this zone prone to child labour, awareness campaigns are essential. Here, half the women admit to having offered up at least 2 children for money.
Before they left, their bosses told us they would not be doing difficult work, but we found out that our children are in forced labour. When they come back, they prefer to leave again. Our children can't stand the poverty here.
Families receive €150 every 3 years. It's how this man was able to pay for his house. He sent 5 of his children to Nigeria.
It's important that we find solutions to reduce this phenomenon.
A trafficker caught selling children red-handed faces between 10 and 20 years in prison. The reality, however, is that Benin's justice system frequently issues suspended sentences.
Missing the global target on education by a long shot. The UN's Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, has released its 2016 Global Education Monitoring Report, measuring how close countries around the world have come to respecting the Sustainable Development Goals. And its results are dire. Only 64 countries met the target of universal primary education by 2015. 93 did not, and 11 countries polled aren't expected to achieve universal primary education until 2100. Those include Niger, Rwanda, and Central African Republic. Now, for more insight on this vast and important topic, our guest is Priya Joshi, who works at the UNESCO and contributed to the report. Thank you so much for joining us here on Eye on Africa on France 24. What are the main reasons that children aren't attending school?
Hello. As you rightly pointed out, many millions of children and young people are not in primary and secondary school. The challenges for sub-Saharan Africa actually are particularly striking. Half of the world's out-of-school children, 31 million, are in sub-Saharan Africa. In countries like Liberia, for instance, over 60% do not attend school. A main reason why children are out of school is poverty. Almost 30% of the poorest children in low-income countries have never been to school. And other children may go to school, but then they drop out early because they need to provide for their families or for various other reasons. The impact of conflict has been making headlines these days, and with good reason. Conflict has devastating effects on schools, teachers, and students. When millions are forcibly removed from their homes and they have to locate to other regions and countries, it becomes a major challenge for education systems in both sending and receiving places. We estimate that 35% of the world's out-of-school children live in conflict-affected countries. Our latest research with UNHCR showed that 50% of refugee children are out of primary school in Nigeria, our primary school. And in Nigeria, children who were displaced by Boko Haram incidents, only half of them were receiving any education in camps. We also know that there are a lot of children of primary and secondary age who are out of camps and living in urban areas, so the numbers might be much higher. So those would be key reasons.
Now, aid levels for education today are below what they were in 2010. Between 2013 and 2014, in fact, global education aid actually fell by $600 million. Is education no longer a priority?
Well, if education was an adequate priority for the international community, perhaps there would be no real need for us to advocate for more funds. So yes, we would argue that education is not enough of a priority given all of its importance for educational and other development. Even in 2010, although it was a peak, it was definitely not enough to cover all needs. Just last year, we estimated that if we want all low and lower middle income children, children to complete primary and secondary school, then aid would have to increase by 6 times. So yes, aid is not a priority. One major issue is that donor countries might not provide aid to countries that need them the most. For instance, if you compare just Mongolia and Chad, in Chad, the country receives $3 per child and only 28% complete primary schooling. And in Mongolia, they receive $45 per child, even though almost everyone goes to school. There are some global efforts, including a new Education Cannot Wait Fund, which will focus on conflicts and disasters, but a lot more needs to be done.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. Priya Joshi from UNESCO, thank you so much for that insight. Getting the world's attention one dance move at a time. South African choreographer Rudy Smit was hoping to catch the eye of U.S. singer Meghan Trainor when he got 27 of his dancers to dance to her song called Me Too. But the Cape Town creative vowed people around the world with his video that's been seen hundreds of thousands of times since it was uploaded on YouTube on Monday. And that's it for this edition. Do stay tuned. There's more news coming up on France 24.